Hello, everyone. This is Tim with the Bedtime Battle Fantasy Football Podcast. Coming at you with another quick snap recap of week one. These are the notable snap percentages. And when I reference fantasy points, I am using half point PPR. In week one, I focused just on wide receivers. This week, I'm going to dive into some running backs as well. And again, if you haven't chimed in yet on this podcast, I am just focusing on some snap percentages that stand out to me. I use snap percentages myself just to determine volume. Sometimes players don't produce like we're hoping that they will. Sometimes we see a big fat goose egg on the stat sheet, and we just feel like they didn't even play. And so I use snap counts to make sure that they were in the game and that they were in the game significantly, because there's nothing worse than a goose egg and a very low snap percentage. So let's dive into the ones that stood out to me this week. The first one is the Arizona Cardinals, specifically the backfield. Something to highlight this week. They were down 20-0 against the Raiders and made an incredible comeback. What I want to feature this week is the fact that James Conner was injured and went down. And so as the year goes on, we always want to know who the backup running back is, who is the handcuff, who is the one that we stash on our bench in case a running back gets hurt. And so even though I don't believe James Conner's injury is significant, it's worth looking at the snap counts so that we know moving forward, if Conner gets hurt again or if he doesn't play, who's his backup. James Conner is someone who historically has had injury issues, and so this is something that we want to know. And looking at the snap count, unfortunately, we might still be wondering who it is moving forward. Eno Benjamin had 43% of the snaps, and Darrell Williams had 46% of the snaps. Really, the only difference between the two of them was Darrell Williams' fantasy points was 13.2 compared to Eno Benjamin 6.6. Darrell Williams was the one that got called in at the goal line. He got that touchdown. And so while this doesn't really paint the picture of who is the backup running back for James Conner, it is worth noting that Darrell Williams was the one who was brought in for that goal line rushing touchdown. And to me, that is significant because James Conner had a lot of touchdowns last year. This is an offense who makes into the red zone often, hopefully, moving forward with Kyler Murray. So to me, if I had to choose between the two, I guess I'd have to lean Darrell Williams because of that goal line carry. So just something to point out. Again, James Conner injury, I haven't heard anything on that, but I haven't seen anything significant. Again, though, if you're just looking at who you should stash, if you have the option between the two, I'd roll the dice on Darrell Williams. The next one is the Packers wide receivers. This is something that we were wondering heading into the season. Devontae Adams left, MVS left. There's big question marks around who's going to be the receiver. They drafted a couple guys, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs. They also brought in some free agents like Sammy Watkins. They had Alan Lazard. The thing worth pointing out, in my opinion, is that Sammy Watkins maintained a consistent snap count between week 1 and week 2. As you may have already known, Alan Lazard was out week 1. He came back week 2 and hit 81% of the snap count. That was the highest of the receivers. So based on this, it looks like he is the number one guy as in terms of the wide receivers. And I would have to say, as of right now, Sammy Watkins is the wide receiver 2 because of that consistent snap percentage. You had Doubs, Watson, and Cobb seem to just kind of combined effort to make up for Lazard being out in week 1. All three of those guys' snap percentage went down significantly by at least about 20%, while Sammy Watkins maintained consistency. So I would say on week 1, the guys were all just getting opportunities while Lazard was out. When Lazard came back, Sammy Watkins played his same role. So I think that is significant in an offense where Aaron Rodgers should start clicking a little bit more, should be passing more, should be efficient, regardless of who he's throwing to. So Again, just want to point out, looks like Sammy Watkins is that wide receiver 2 as of right now and will not be impacted by Doubs, Watson, Cobb. Of course, as time goes on, that could change. But right now, if you're looking at the backfield or the wide receivers and you're looking on the waiver wires and Sammy Watkins is there along with Doubs, Watson, Cobb, I would say take that chance on Sammy Watkins right now. Hopefully you're not in that position, but you might be. And so it's worth noting. Third is the Houston Texans. I am a big Dameon Pierce fan. I drafted him in almost all of my leagues. As the month of August went on, I had to keep paying more and more for that draft capital with Dameon Pierce. I kept doing it, and after week 1, I was extremely frustrated, extremely discouraged. In many leagues, was facing the option of wondering if I needed to drop him because Rex Burkhead has 71% of the snap count compared to just 29% for Dameon Pierce. They did end up tying with the Colts. So the question was, is Burkhead in there more because he's the receiver, because he's a better blocker when they're playing come from behind? But this week, the Texans were struggling against the Broncos overall. They never had a big lead. It was always a close game, and Dameon Pierce went from 29% to 62% snap count, while Burkhead dropped from 71 all the way down to 37%. So I'm crossing my fingers. I'm hoping this is a huge sign that maybe Dameon Pierce just got some rookie treatment from Lovie Smith in week 1. Burkhead got that veteran All-American. There he is with his flag. He got that benefit of the doubt. He got to start that first game. But looking at these numbers, my hope is that Dameon Pierce has risen up to that true number 1 in that backfield. Even though it doesn't come with a ton of upside in terms of touchdowns, I still, again, I'm a volume play kind of guy. And if Dameon Pierce is going to be in there week in, week out as that main grinder in a Lovie Smith offense, he's going to have opportunities. And it's safe to say that he is your RB3 at worst. He's probably your RB4. And so he is a guy who is worth hanging on to. Hopefully you didn't make any rash decisions and drop him after week 1. I hung on to him. And I'm hoping moving forward, he just continues to establish himself in that backfield. New York Giants. Not an exciting team to talk about. Saquon Barkley seems to be having a resurgence, which is great. But I want to focus on the pathetic wide receiver room that is the New York Giants. It's baffling to me. I don't know what's going on. But Sterling Shepard seems to be the main guy. Week 1, he had 72% of snap count. Week 2, he had 88% of snap count. He had that Achilles issue, just like James Robinson, seems to not be impacting him. He's in there almost on all the snaps. So he's definitely that main guy. And I've still seen him out on the waiver wire a lot. So if you're putting in those waiver requests today or later on this week, you're looking at a guy who might be a plug and play option. I don't see anything wrong with grabbing Sterling Shepard and playing him if you really need a guy to play. He's the number 1 receiving option in an offense, which even in the worst of offense, you need someone to catch the ball. So Shepard is a big play, but something I really want to highlight here that this was a big standout to me. A couple things. Kadarius Toney continues to get very odd treatment. I don't know what's going on there. He was drafted very highly last year, and yet they continue to just be bullish on him. I don't know what's going on, but week 2, he just had 38% of the snaps. And then, Kenny G, I don't know what's going on with Galladay. I think we've already lost faith in him. So I'm confident that he's not on a lot of rosters. If he is, I don't see a reason to hang on to him unless you're in some super deep dynasty, but he went from 77% of the snap count in week 1, which was promising, all the way down to 3%. And I don't know if this is a rumor that I heard, but something about he's cleaned up his locker. He's done. I don't know if he's just fully checked out of football, but that is not what you want to see from a guy who got a big payday, who had a successful career in Detroit prior to coming over to the Giants, was one of the biggest free agent acquisitions. But Kenny Galladay, his career might be over. And the biggest thing to point out with this receiving group, and I think just speaks volumes to why I'm even higher on Sterling Shepard, a guy named David Sills the fifth had a 45% week one snap percentage, and he was all the way up to 92% in week two. This is obviously an old picture that I found of him, but he was recruited at some point in his career. He was drafted. He's on this team. Something about him that the Giants love that got him all the way on that field 92% of the time. But I'm going to equate this to last week's observations about Mac Hollins, who had 88% of the snap count in week one. That stood out to me. I made him my deep league dart throw in our weekly podcast that we record later on in the week. And Mac Hollins had 5 catches for over 50 yards, which is respectable, especially when I'm pegging him as a guy who is a deep league dart throw, who is more of a desperation play anyways. But I guess we have to keep our eyes on this guy named David Sills, because his only other competition is Kenny Galladay, who is washed, and Kadarius Toney, who has zero faith from the coaching staff. So if Sills can come in there and put in 92% of snaps comparable to Sterling Shepard, A, prioritize Shepard, B, just keep an eye on Sills. If you're in a super deep league and you have empty waiver spots or empty roster spots and just don't know who you want to grab Sills for a week and see what happens next week. I'm not saying he's going to do anything. Do not put him in your starting lineup, but why not throw him on the end of your roster if you have space? And our last one, the Buccaneers, another revolving door at wide receiver for very different reasons. Chris Godwin banged up. Who knows when he's going to come back? Julio Jones banged up. Who knows when he's going to come back? Mike Evans getting into fights and suspended for a week, so he's out. Tom Brady just continues to get to roll out whoever's there and throw to whoever he trusts. And I want to point out Rashad Perriman. Week one, he was 42%. Week two, he jumped up to 75% due to the Julio Jones injury. He's proven to be a trusted commodity of Tom Brady. And while he doesn't produce over the course of the year, he always seems to get targets from Tommy Boy, and he produces from that. And he's a guy who's most definitely on the waiver wire right now. So if you need an easy plug and play and a guy that might get work, he's worth grabbing. We don't know if Julio Jones is going to be out or Chris Godwin's going to be out. I wouldn't play Perriman if either one of those are in play. But if they're both out again too, Perriman might be that number one receiving option for at least a week with the Buccaneers. And then you also have Russell Gage. He also saw a similar increase in snaps last week because of the injuries and the suspension. And while I don't think he's as trusted of a target as Tom Brady yet, he's just another guy who could have a higher volume this week because of the injuries and suspensions. So that's all I have for this week in my quick snap recap. I hope this is helpful information for you to use as you're considering short-term and long-term plays in your fantasy football leagues. This is Tim signing out from the Bedtime Battle Podcast, and I'm going to bed. Have a wonderful night.